Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com. Happy to be with you on Friday, the 23rd day of February 2018. Ton of stuff we're going to get into today. I do want to set a little bit of a recap of some of the stuff that we went over this week, just in case you're interested in keeping the conversation going. We started the week talking about the Louisville basketball situation and how ridiculous it is. The thought that the NCAA can be a more powerful governing body than God himself. In other words, could take something that happened and make it suddenly not happen. And I think that's fascinating, hilarious. One of the points we made in regards to unifying America, as we get the intro of the show going, or maybe we can't. All types of technical issues, and obviously, you know, that's a big thing here in the Passball Show. We make sure that we have as many technical issues that could possibly impact the listener, the viewer, and the whole thing. But, you know, the point that I made earlier in the week, we were talking about what kind of gets thrown in our heads subliminally and how strong it's been in regards to points that, you know, we all say that are our own opinion, but yet the news and the media that is stuck with us, that we follow day in and day out, you know, how much of that has been put in our head and essentially forced us to believe what we believe and make our points for us without our opinion even being what it is. We try to say, this is our opinion. This is how we feel about things. But is it really what we feel? Have we gone so one-sided in regards to the way that we receive our news? The news that we believe? Have it so instilled in our head that we are essentially being told what to think and how to feel? Those are some powerful points, and I think we should all, as Americans, try to digest things as they're going through us and make a decision. Are we going to believe what we're told to believe, or are we going to be independent enough that we could disagree with those that share the narrative that's been thrown at us and stuck in our head in regards to every single thing that we hear? But we are here to talk baseball today, and if you're a baseball fan, you got to be excited about what you see on the baseball field. Number one, you see any sort of baseball action and you're a baseball fan, you have to be excited. You have to get into whatever it is your favorite team is and feel that there's a possibility that your team can make a run. And, you know, you could have the worst outlook in regards to what you think your team is going to be this year. And still, at this moment, on the 23rd day of February, you feel like there's going to be a chance that everything can possibly go right today. And it may change tomorrow. You know, we could talk about injuries. We could talk about, you know, just what you see on the field being just about as bad as you thought it might be. But between now and the end of the month, the 29th, the 28th-ish, when baseball gets their season started, you feel like there's a shot. There's a chance. One of the things I wanted to get into today is in regards to baseball's free agents. And we've spent a ton of time talking about this offseason, about the amount of free agents that are still out there. And I'm going to put a piece together, and we'll see it on my JohnPielli.com website, Bases Empty blog, the whole thing. We set free agents, and we could probably do this twice. In other words, there's 81 total official free agents that are still out there in Major League Baseball. And that means we could go through the league once. We could go through the league again if we're having some sort of draft and saying, hey, every team can get one free agent. Every team can get two free agents. So I'm going to put a piece together and kind of narrow it down. Obviously, you got the top free agents that are out there. You know, the Arrietas, the Lance Lynns, the Alex Cobbs, the Mike Moustakas, Carlos Gonzalez, Logan Morrison. They would probably be the top free agents. There's other ones out there that you could throw in, like Lucas Duda, Mike Napoli. Obviously, a lot of pitchers that are still out there to still have some value. Jeremy Hellickson could probably help some team. John Lackey, if he wants to still pitch, could certainly help a team. Matt Garza, position players like Neil Walker, Jose Bautista, who is, obviously forgotten about in this free agent market because of the lack there of movement. You got Houston Street, who was at one point a very good and dominant closer in this game. So certainly a number of options. And we could be fair about it. We could say that every single one of the 30 teams, and geez, we forgot about Greg Holland already. And I'll tell you, the more that we go through this list, the more we'll throw names out there that could certainly benefit teams. And, some in a small way, but some in very large ways. You think of this, the amount of pitchers that are still out there, the amount of pitchers that have had impact in Major League Baseball as early as last season. And we can talk about the top teams in baseball, or the teams that we expect to do pretty well, or the ones that are right on the edge, right on the peripheries of being a good baseball team. Maybe a move or two away from being in a better position. So usually at this time of year, I'm putting together my 30-1 MLB countdown previews. And if you're not familiar with the way that works, I do a team preview for all 30 Major League Baseball teams, but I start with the team that I think is going to be the worst in Major League Baseball, and I work my way back. Well, before I do that this year, and usually I would have had it started by the middle of the month, but I tell you, there's so much uncertainty that exists with what you could expect out of a lot of teams that are kind of in the middle of the pack. If we have figured out one thing, we figured out what teams are going to be really good or have the best chances. And we've also figured out what teams have absolutely quit. Have you shown your quit today? Your quit is showing. In regards to the Miami Marlins, the Tampa Bay Rays, the Pittsburgh Pirates, teams of that echelon that we know want to go into a rebuild, and that's the best way that they're going to say it to you. They're going through a rebuilding phase. They're focused on the future. They think the future is going to be bright, but they know that they have to kind of start from the bottom. That's become a trend in Major League Baseball. And I don't know if it's all about the Houston Astros, the fact that they went from worst to still really bad, still pretty darn bad, to a little bit good and won the World Series in 2017. That's become the model now. A lot of teams that are kind of in the middle of the pack, figuring, hey, we might be able to vie for a wild card spot if every single thing goes right and perfect for us. They've decided to kind of give up and quit. And, that does terrible things for the players, the coaching staff, those that are pretty invested in the game and care about the team, but obviously destroys the fans. And we have not hit a point in Major League Baseball history, or at least in my lifetime. Now, there's things that I could talk about in regards to numbers and stats and results and information that existed prior to the time that I was born. But before I was born, I can't talk about different feelings that I had about teams coming into the season. In other words, the 79 Mets, for instance, were a very bad baseball team. The outlook coming into that season probably was not very good. They probably made a couple marginal additions, which they did, but the expectations were they're going to be a back of the league team, a second division club. So, the thought coming into that season were the Mets essentially just giving up as they were looking to build towards the future. Now in a game, as you look at it now, it's so obvious that a team is not trying. Now, you're never going to question the results that are on the field or question the effort of the players that are playing. But when a team has, let's say, a handful of minor league players that aren't ready for the big leagues, or veterans that are making close to the league minimum, and you realize if the team was any good, they probably wouldn't be starting for them. You could kind of tell what the team's motive is or interest level is. From an organizational standpoint, they quit. They could care less about winning in this coming season. Their emphasis is on the future. They may have a lot of money invested on their scouting and their analytics department and everything that they're focused on trying to build a winner down the road. But right now, you know that team is going to stink. And it's a shame for the players that are on the field. And I'm trying to think of the Miami Marlins for a second, because we did have a Marlins player tune into one of the shows this week. And I'm trying to think of what it feels like to be a veteran player on a team that absolutely has no interest in winning. Now, there's no way that anybody that considers himself a professional, both on the field and as a person, is going to compromise their own integrity or their own effort level, or are going to take to the media to say that I know our team is going to stink. And there's veteran players on every team. There's veteran players on the Rays. There's veteran players on the Pirates. There's veteran players on every single team that you would think is not really making the biggest effort from a front office standpoint to compete in this coming season. So it isn't fair to go out there and say this team isn't trying, or they're not going to make the best effort, or from a mental, approach, they're just saying, hey, we've thrown a towel. The front office and the ownership has thrown in the towel, so me, the player, is going to do that too. We don't expect that to happen with anybody. But from an analytical standpoint, as you're studying the game and you're trying to judge what teams look better than other teams, you understand that there is a division when it comes to the amount of talent from the top teams in baseball to the lower teams in baseball. The teams that are rebuilding shouldn't belong on the same playing field as the teams that are ready to win. And whether you're a veteran player on a bad team or not, it's still where the odds are stacked against you. And it's not meant to discourage the individual players and tell them that, them as individuals aren't any good, or if everything broke exactly perfect for them, that they wouldn't have a chance to overachieve. These are all possibilities. And I remember that Oakland Athletics team of 2012 that I took some shots at. I didn't make anything personal in regards to my team previews. I thought they would be a worse team than the Houston Astros, and I was wrong. That team was an example of how, if everything works together perfect, if you have a couple young players that come in and break out on the scene maybe a year or two before they're expected to, and veterans hold the clubhouse together, and they have great leadership from their manager on down, teams can overachieve. If you're going to ask my guess of where I think the Marlins or the Pirates or the Tampa Bay Rays or even the Royals are going this year, I'm not going to give the most positive endorsement to those teams. But going back to my original point, talking about free agents in baseball, it has made it very hard to say the middle pack teams, the teams that aren't towards the top or towards the bottom where they stand. Because I think we've established where the top teams are going to be and where the bottom teams are going to be. We know the top teams could possibly even get better, but we know the bottom teams are probably not going to add very much to the construction of their roster because they've already quit. They may add a couple of veterans to fill out the roster, but we know what happens when you add a couple of veterans to fill out your roster. You're essentially looking for somebody to take a paycheck. Somebody to just go out there, play 140 games. Maybe they're trying to market themselves for either next year or maybe the trading deadline. Maybe they could go to a contender in July or August. But this year's a little tougher to judge. And I'm going to hold off for probably at least another couple days, at least until I put my free agent piece together, because I think that'll be a fun one. We take 81 free agents right now. And there may be some more out there that aren't even, official free agents. But you could go down this list to about 50 or 60 players and still see at least respectable major leaguers that could help a team. They could help a bad team and make them a little bit better. They could help a good team and maybe put them over the top. But most importantly, they could help that team that's right there in the middle. And there's probably about 10, 12, maybe 15 teams that if they made the playoffs, you might be a little surprised, but you would not be completely shocked. You'd understand it. You'd say, hey, they got enough talent. Maybe they added another piece somewhere along the way and put themselves over the hump. There's, like I said, the top teams that you would almost be surprised if they didn't make the playoffs. And in the American League, I'm talking about the Astros, the Yankees, the Indians, the Red Sox, teams like that. In the National League, the Cubs, the Dodgers, the Nationals. Maybe another couple teams that are pushing the envelope. Maybe the Diamondbacks are a piece away. Maybe the Rockies are right there and ready to go. Maybe the Giants can turn it around from last year with the moves that they made for Andrew McCutchen and Evan Longoria. But the middle teams, and I'm saying there's still about 12 to 15 teams that are stuck right there in the middle. And like I said, if I was going to endorse them and say they're a playoff team now, I might feel like I'm a little bit off. But if they made a move or two, I might say, hey, that was the move that they made that was going to be able to put them maybe outside of the bottom 20 that don't make it and put them into the top 10 that do make it. But I'm just looking at the amount of players that are still out there. A lot of pitchers, a lot of starting pitchers, a lot of relief pitchers. Certainly role players that could be bench players, but also could start for a handful of teams. And then you still have the other part of it, which is still a certain percentage of the top of the free agent class. And I think you look at some of these players, and I don't think they're going to be all top heavy in regards to already joining the teams that are in the best position. Because I think the majority of those teams are pretty set. The majority of those teams had a regular off season in Major League Baseball that you could say is close enough to where they should not want to feel like they need to make any more moves. Sure, injuries happen, inconsistent play happens, things happen over the course of the season. When you're playing, you realize, all right, maybe I'm a little weaker in this one spot than I thought coming into the season. And that's what the trading deadline's for. But usually teams don't start to swing that way until the season has started. But I would say the teams that are at the top of the top 8 per se. And I gave you my 4 American League teams. I think I only gave you 3 National League teams. The other one I'll give you is the Rockies. The Rockies will be my 4th NL team. Cubs, Dodgers, Nationals, Rockies. American League, Yankees, Red Sox, Indians, Astros. I think those 8 teams by themselves are probably in a league of their own. And I told you, there's still a group of 12 to potentially 15 teams that could compete for those last 2 spots. And maybe if they overachieve, they might be able to bump one of the other 8 out. But what makes this off season so much more significant than others is there's so much more that can be done in regards to free agency. I look at a guy like Jose Bautista, and he probably at this stage of his career could be a DH for somebody. He had such a down season in 2017 that his days of being a star player or that impact player or that guy that you put in your 3 or 4 hole of your lineup have probably passed him. But if you're looking at a team that might be a DH away, he'd be a very good fit. Logan Morrison, a guy who put a season that was probably close enough to that of Eric Hosmer last year. Didn't have the batting average, but certainly from a power standpoint, was just as productive as Eric Hosmer. Could be had for obviously millions upon millions of dollars less when it comes to, adding him on a contract for maybe a year or 2 tops. So there's a lot of options out there for teams that need offense, but when it comes to teams that need pitchers, if one of the 12 to 15 that I'm talking about adds themselves a Jake Arrieta, and I was thinking Milwaukee. I was also thinking of the Phillies. But other teams that haven't been mentioned, maybe the Colorado Rockies, who I said is in the top 8, but you know what? They could put themselves over the top with a signing like that. What about Arizona? the Diamondbacks as we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show. Once again, John Pielli with you. The number, if you want to be involved in the program, is 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. You can comment through Periscope. You can comment through Facebook Live if you want. We're talking baseball right now, but I do want to recap some of the other topics we hit up this week. Does somebody in the Cleveland Cavaliers organization in NBA basketball, should somebody in their public relations department be fired because of the constant leaks to the media? I think that's an interesting topic. When it comes to the Olympics, how do people feel about a gold medal game in women's hockey being determined by a shootout? But as we continue to talk baseball here, I'm excited about putting a piece together that will pretty much summarize the top 60 free agents that have been unsigned right now. And I think we can go around the league once in almost like a fantasy baseball draft and allow each team to pick a player. And you know what? I'll start with the bottom and, allow for the bottom teams to take the player that will be most suited for the direction that they're looking to go into. I mean, if we were naming Jake Arrieta as the number one available player and the team that looks the worst is the Miami Marlins at number 30, right now. Obviously, I'm not going to put Jake Arrieta on the Miami Marlins. So there is a lot of, in-depth analysis that has to be put into this because you can't take the best player and put him on the worst team because the worst team doesn't want to sign the best player. The worst team doesn't want to spend any money. The worst team wants to be cheap. The worst team really wants to be the worst team. As Scott Boras said, the race to the bottom. And there's a good 4 or 5 teams that are trying to compete for the worst record in all of Major League Baseball. So if you gave them the best available free agent right now, they probably wouldn't want to take him. So I think we'd have to, really spend some time to break down. All right, maybe the Marlins could use a starting pitcher. Maybe we could put a guy like, let's say, a Jeremy Hellickson in a Miami Marlins uniform. And maybe somebody a little better than that. Maybe a Matt Garza. You look at, guys like Clay Buchholz and R.A. Dickey if he wants to pitch. Could a Neil Walker potentially help out the Miami Marlins? So they would deserve a good player, but maybe not the top of the top. Does that mean that, Arrieta goes to the Nationals? No, I look at a team like the Phillies really be in a very good spot for Jake Arrieta. And I've mentioned it on multiple occasions this offseason. This is a guy that if you sign him for a long-term deal, the Phillies could embrace him as part of their future as well as being their present. Now if they were to sign him to, let's say, like a 1-year deal, it would look pretty foolish. There wouldn't really be any sense to that of why you would want to sign a player at that caliber to a 1-year deal when odds are the Phillies, if everything works out for them, maybe win 80, 82 games. And this is if everything works out 100% perfect and, players kind of build over the next couple months of the season. Young players star a little bit. You get, let's say a Carlos Santana, playing at an all-star level. If all this happens, then the Phillies, maybe they're close to a 500 team. Maybe they're not. But you add a guy like Jake Arrieta on a 1-year deal, it wouldn't make sense for them to do that. So if Scott Boras is doing the job that he is expected to do, trying to get the longest term deal for the most lucrative amount of dollars, he would pursue the Phillies about potentially a 4-year deal. Now maybe that's where the battle is. Maybe that's the reason that Jake Arrieta isn't signed yet. If you ask Jake Arrieta and Scott Boras, they're still waiting for this $200 million contract to come his way. But, from the standpoint right now, and we have to start asking some of these players, and I mentioned this over the last couple of weeks, what point of the offseason, as we start spring training and there's actual games going on right now, does the player say, enough is enough. Working out in free agent camp, not signed without a job. I understand, there's a lot of negativity going on in what the owners are doing and the teams that are quitting and not even trying. There's not going to be any law or anything implemented that's going to force every team in baseball to sign a player. Teams can go through the entire offseason without adding a player on a major league contract in regards to free agency. But, you look at the amount of players that are left out there, and I tell you, it looks good. I mean, you probably can't build a team with that group of free agents anymore. And I think the signings of Hosmer and a J.D. Martinez have made it a little tougher. You could still certainly have a starting first baseman with, Logan Morrison or Lucas Duda. You could play Neil Walker at second base. Shortstop's going to be a little tough. And I know we were trying to dig for a shortstop before. Maybe a Yunel Escobar. I know he's been a couple years removed from being a shortstop. He would probably be your starting shortstop on your all-free agent team. The third baseman would certainly be Mike Moustakas, and he's a guy that is certainly surprising that he hasn't been signed yet. And you want to build an outfield. Might not be a perfect outfield, but obviously Carlos Gonzalez would be there, Melky Cabrera, and maybe your last outfielder might be Jose Bautista, or perhaps a Matt Holliday DH or something like that. Brandon Phillips adds you depth on the infield. If you're looking for starting pitchers, obviously your top three is going to be very strong with Jake Arrieta and Lance Lynn and Alex Cobb. And then you fill out the back of the rotation with some serviceable guys that, certainly back of the rotation guys that could help. A Jeremy Hellickson, like I mentioned before. I'm trying to think of anybody else. Maybe Clay Buchholz, maybe on a comeback kind of deal. R.A. Dickey, I'm pretty sure, has decided he was going to retire. From what I heard last offseason, he was pretty much either going to come back to the Braves or retire. So I kind of put him on the retired list, not necessarily on available free agents. Relievers, you start with certainly Greg Holland as your closer. Koei Uehara, who, Uehara as a reliever is a guy that probably is going to want a major league deal. Joe Blanton, Jason Grilli, Oliver Perez. Other guys like Jeff Locke, Sung-Hwan Oh, who almost had a deal with the Texas Rangers, Scott Feldman. And then you look from a extra relievers or starters or bench players like Matt Belisle, Pedro Alvarez, Ichiro, Robbie Ross, Eric Ibar, John Jaso, played in a lot of major league games last year, Danny Valencia, Tyler Clippard. So you could probably build a solid 25-man roster with the amount of free agents that are out there. And like I said, if we were doing fantasy baseball, snake draft version of free agents, we could put 2 solid players on every Major League Baseball team. And it's just a shame that there's so many free agents that are out there that haven't been signed. In the end, I think they're all going to be playing. I don't think anybody's career is going to be destroyed by this. But one thing you have to compare it to, if you go back in baseball history, and whether it is 100% collusion based or not, you got to compare it to the times of the 1980s, when guys like Al Oliver and Bob Horner and potentially Billy Sample, had their careers ended because of a lack of contract offers that they had. There was good players that had solid numbers and all of a sudden just didn't have a job the next year. And when baseball found that there was collusion involved, they obviously, fined the teams and, penalized them, but also reimbursed players for money that was lost when they could have signed a deal. I don't know how much collusion is involved right now in regards to baseball as we're looking at free agents. But I think it's something that still has to be considered. Still right now, as we look at it right at this point in 2018 with baseball games being played right now. teams fielding lineups. But you could actually put a Major League Baseball team together, albeit it wouldn't be a good one. It would be a team that would be competing with the Marlins and the Rays. I'll tell you that to start. But I don't know if this team of free agents that we put together, you want to put a 25-man roster on the top 25 free agents to put in all these different positions, I don't think it would be a dominant team. It would be a marginal team. It'll be a team, I don't know, around replacement player. Obviously, not all the players on the team would be replacement players. It would have stars. It would have all-stars like Jake Arrieta and Carlos Gonzalez and Mike Moustakas, Lance Lynn, Alex Cobb. Would certainly be above average Major League players that would be part of this roster. But that would be a good question. How about the teams that are tanking it? Could this team of free agents beat the teams that are tanking it? Beating the teams that aren't even given an effort. Teams that have young players that have traded away all their good players and are filling out their roster with just above replacement player level players. But once again, we'll start the previews. We'll get them going in a little bit. But I do want to put together a piece, which I will, in regards to the free agents that are still out there. We'll put a 25-man roster together. But we'll also go fantasy baseball, snake draft version. And put, because there's 81 free agents that are left out there, the top 60 of those 81 free agents will put on a Major League roster. And we'll figure out what players will be best suited to help each individual team. The Marlins may need a little depth in the outfield. I know they signed Cameron Maybin. Maybe they need another veteran on the infield, maybe at second base or at shortstop. Maybe a starting pitcher. And we'll do it in a reasonable way. Like I said, I'm not going to, give the Marlins the number 1 overall pick and give them Jake Arrieta because, it doesn't make sense in regards to what they're looking to do. Do I agree with what they're doing? Absolutely not. Would I put Jake Arrieta on their team if I was Major League Baseball? Maybe I'd think of trying to find some way to do that. Balance out the talent. Say, hey, free agents, they haven't signed. You can't agree to a deal with somebody. All right, we're going to put you on a team. And I'll make another fantasy baseball, comparison. How about that person that auto drafts their team? Maybe you could put the Marlins and the Rays and the Royals and the Pirates kind of on that auto draft mode and say, hey, you know what? You didn't select anybody for free agency. You didn't try. We're going to make you take somebody. And how many people in fantasy baseball, look at that auto drafted team and say, hey, that team was a little better than maybe it could have been if somebody actually picked that team. Because what does an auto draft do? It takes the best available player at every position and every time in a draft. And maybe that that team put together is better than the worst team in your league or the worst drafter. Maybe the person that made some boneheaded picks along the way. Maybe was a little too biased in regards to what they were thinking when they were analyzing their favorite baseball team. Maybe they were a Mets fan that took too many Mets, or a Phillies fan that took too many Phillies. But that team that was auto-drafted ended up with good players because they took the best player that was available at the time. So how would you put this team together? If you're putting, number one, the all-free agent team, I want to make sure that we, when we put this team together, it's based off of positions. So you may have, let's say, if you have a DH, Logan Morris would be a first baseman. Lucas Duda might be your DH. You'd use a guy like Mike Napoli off your bench. But obviously, you look at the amount of first basemen that are still out there, that might put somebody on the borderline of making the team or not making the team. That might make it a little tough for a Matt Holliday to be that 25th man on the bench. Ryan Howard, who is looking to still want to play this year, he's about 7, 8, 9, 10 deep in regards to free agent first basemen that are ahead of him, that are ahead of him in regards to talent and ability, and the level to impact the team that they could potentially sign with. Carlos Ruiz, would help as a catcher. Is there a backup catcher here? Let's see. As I'm scrolling down this free agent list, well, you know what? Carlos Ruiz will be a backup. I forgot all about Jonathan Lucroy. Jesus. I mean, how can you forget about, a guy like that, perennial all-star, came off of a very good finish to a season with the Colorado Rockies last year after he was traded from the Texas Rangers. So you would have a team, and you know what? The more I look at this team, the more I think they could probably beat the Marlins or the Rays. And I think would be right up there with the Royals and the Tigers and a couple other teams that aren't really trying. Mark Reynolds,